Hey everyone, this is Mike Dunn.
And I'm Janine Dunn.
I'm Julie Cook.
And you are listening to Rethinking EDU. We're so glad you're here to join us for this amazing episode. We're winding away slowly at the end of summer. August is coming to a close, and co-hosts, I know that you probably don't want me to talk about this, but lots of people out there are already back in school, kind of already getting ready to go to school.
Boo.
Julie, Julie, you feeling okay about going back to school? Maybe?
I'm excited to go back. I don't know what it's going to look like again.
Yeah,
like we're back in the same zone of uncertainty, but still looking forward to it. Can't wait to get back with the kids.
Yeah, I agree.
Good. Yeah, I too am excited to go back. Should be an interesting year. I'm hopeful for all of the best. Everybody stays safe, and all you educators out there, you know, we're rooting for you, hand over fist, and really hoping for an amazing year from everybody. And to join us in this conversation, we have Dr. Antonio Boyd. Antonio, have you gotten used to people calling you doctor yet? Because it's a little weird for me. I don't know about you.
No, it's weird for me as well. As a matter of fact, I work with two other doctors, and one of my colleagues, Dr. Melanie Hicks, she's been a doctor for a while. I told her, what do you do when you have this weird feeling about being called a doctor? She said, I just have, people call me Mel, and then in formal settings, I let them call me doctor. So that's kind of been the way I've approached it. I'm still Antonio. And then if you want to call me Dr. Boyd, that's on you. But I'm not flying in that lane right now because it doesn't matter, That's how I look at it.
Yeah. I actually, a couple people call me Dr. Mike, and that feels probably the most natural, way to deal with that. But Dr. Dunn, that's serious. That's like I'm in a bad crime television show or something like that, and I'm Dr. Dunn. That's very serious. Yeah. So Dr. Antonio, or just Antonio, you are the executive vice president of a organization called Future of School. It's a national education intermediate organization that's mobilizing change in American K-12 schools. Now, your work with them is really surrounding encouraging education to become more personalized, more equitable model for all students, no matter where their learning takes place. And I should add here that you are also a recently minted columnist for Getting Smart, which is super amazing. I'm so happy for you, but I don't want to dive quite into Getting Smart yet. I want to go back to Future of School. Can you give our listeners a little snapshot about what Future of School is all about?
Right. Yeah. So, our mission is to, like you said, ensuring that all students reach their unbounded potential, no matter where their learning takes place. So we are basically trying to mobilize not only schools and districts, but also educators, organizations, and businesses in the system so that it flows more, fluidly for students. And so that's our end goal, is just to make sure that the students can reach as high as they can in an equitable space with all the support they need. And so it's really been a wonderful ride because we've been able to work with students, we've been able to work with teachers, and I've been spending a lot of time, guys, with parents. I'm actually got a Getting Smart article coming out tomorrow called Leave No Parent Behind. And the article emphasizes where parents are in COVID-19 right now, COVID-19 Delta, we're calling it, and just some of their issues and concerns that they have. And then some of the things we learned due to the pandemic about parents and ed tech. And I don't want to go too into it because you said you're going to come back to this, but we've learned a lot of phenomenal things about how when you guys as teachers send little Johnny home, what does mom and dad do once he gets home? And there's an equity issue there. Some parents obviously know how to use a Chromebook. They know how to use a Surface. They know how to use an iPad. But there are tons of parents who have no clue. Little Johnny comes home, they can't help him. It's sort of like we used to say in the old days when my parents would parent me. I don't know the new math, Antonio, so you're going to have to go talk to somebody else, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And so we have done a lot of research and work in that area. So be happy to talk about that as well. So that's kind of what we are, and that's what we do.
It's really fascinating when you think about it. The changing science around teaching is happening right before our eyes, right? And as a result, so many parents are kind of left at home. Like you were saying, I don't know about the new math. That's because our teaching is getting better, right? We're teaching students in new ways and more engaging ways, but also in more like ways that are, you know, tapped into neuroscience and tapped into student psychology. And as a result, a lot of parents I found to be feeling like they're out of the loop. They're not able to help their kid as much. And that's especially true for parents that might only have a GED or might only have an associate's degree or might be a little bit older. They just don't have access to those kinds of knowledge bases in order to help their kids in secondary schools that are continuing to emphasize higher and higher level thinking all through their K-12 experience. So I'm glad you guys are doing that work, and that sounds really important. I want to talk just for a minute before we get in more into future school about you, though. And we're sort of joking at the beginning about Dr. Antonio, Dr. Boyd, what have you. But the reason why we're calling you that is because you recently completed the EDD program at Northeastern University. That's how we met. And I'm just curious, like, we've talked on this podcast a lot about the reasons why we all ended up getting into that program, but I'm wondering what kind of brought you there? Like, what led you to Northeastern? What led you to that EDD program? What were some of your motivations?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it'll tie into even why my son is here. So I work for a global charity called Hope Worldwide, and I was actually the vice president of North America. And that charity focuses on youth programs, disaster relief, volunteerism. And my job directly was to oversee 14 countries and 37,500 volunteers, if you can believe that. And I used to travel. I've been to every disaster in the last 10 years. Because a big part of our work was disaster services. So I traveled like 127 times a year. And then in 2015, I got diagnosed with liver cirrhosis. And basically they said, you're stage
Wow.
4, right? And so we're going to have to do a liver transplant on you. And in 2016, you're going to get it, and then your life's going to change. You'll never be able to do that type of job again. So one of our Northeastern alumnus, Dr. Katrina Spigner, close friend of mine, she said, Antonio, you need to go get your doctorate so that when you get through this transplant process, you could teach, you could, do all kinds of things, consult, you could do, you'll have some kind of write books, whatever you want to do. And so I was like, I don't know about that. I'm old. I'm a grandfather. What am I going to do that for? But I liked the
Yeah.
program because it was online. It was in Charlotte. And so once I got into it, it's interesting because I was going to be OLS, Organizational Leadership Studies, but my research was about career pathways for kids in high school, secondary school. So my sister or my wife told me, she said, you need to go into curriculum teaching learning because that's more related to what you're doing. So literally, guys, I have tons of experience in organizational leadership, but I had no clue about what you guys do. And so for me, I sat at the front of the class the whole ride because I was like, curriculum, all this Dr. Unger, experiential learning. I mean, all of it was fresh for me. So it's been a wonderful experience. And why my son is here is because they're now saying that I'll know if I have to go on the transplant list on Wednesday. So he's coming because he came here because he was like, I want to be there when they either make the decision that you've got to move forward or they're saying that, you're okay and you won't have to move forward. So literally, this is happening in real time. So you guys got me on a good week.
Wow. What a wild ride, Antonio. I can't even imagine. Well, before we move any more forward, I have to say, like, the most positive vibes, the most positive thoughts that I can possibly send your way 100 million times over, my friend. Thank you. Thank you for your work and education. Thank you for being here with us when, this moment is coming forward for you and
bring in your positive spirit. I mean, I can speak from just being in class with you, just how I think, motivating you are for other people, and for you to be going through something like that while you're going through a doctoral program, that is inspirational.
I think that, guys, I think the program got me through. There are many discouraging days when you're battling liver disease. And I told my son in the car, I said, this was my COVID, going to Northeast, was my COVID project, right? Because I could have been depressed,
Mm-hmm.
but I had something to keep my focus, and fellowshipping with colleagues like you, and just learning new stuff. It makes your mind feel more invigorated, and you don't think about negative things like I would have if I didn't go through the program. So I thank Dr. K, and I thank all my colleagues and professors, because it really gave me a good life while I was going through this process.
Now, you certainly seem like one of those people. You have your hands in a little bit of everything going on, and I know you've done way more work up to this point, that I'm sure you could probably tell. We'll have to have several podcasts for you to kind of capture all the work that you've done. But I'm wondering if you could maybe kind of talk a little bit about, like, what was the catalyst that really brought you to Future of School? Like, what really drew you into working with that organization?
Yeah, that's a funny, I appreciate you asking me that question. So what I was doing before Future School was, when I got diagnosed, my wife said, you can consult a little bit, but we got to monitor. So I used to chair the South Carolina Association of Nonprofits, and they have a consultancy, an education consultant that, is available for any education nonprofit in the state. And so they made me that consultant. So when COVID hit, I got a call from Amy Valentine, who's the president and CEO of Future of School, because she had given a Innovative Educator Prize to a teacher in Anderson County. And guys, to tell you the landscape of South Carolina, we have 47 districts. We have 20 that are blended and online. We have 17 that are blend online/pencil, what we call online/pencil. But then we have what we call our equity districts, which are rural, poor districts that are all pen and paper. So when COVID hit, they had no clue about how they were going to do online and blended, because they just don't have the money to buy the Chromebooks and stuff, if you could believe that, in 2021.
Oh,
So
I believe it. Yeah.
this teacher, she had these kids that lived in this poor community, and she needed 37 Chromebooks. So Amy called me, and the first time she called me, I hung up because I thought it was one of those calls, right? Click. And then she called me back and said, my name is Amy. And I said, oh, okay. She said, you're the guy for South Carolina. Can you help me raise some money to get some Chromebooks? I've got these kids. And I said, well, I can't help you raise no money, but I do know the president of the United Way of Anderson County. And I called her, and she said, I'm working on food and medicine and all these things. You know how when COVID first hit, social service agencies were right in the middle of it. She said, well, let's call the United Way Association, which we served on the board of that before. And they had just bought 137, or been donated by Google, 137 Chromebooks to do the census. And of course, in COVID, nobody's going to do the census, right? So we talked to, they have a headquarters in Charleston, and they donated the Chromebooks to that school. And so Amy was like, bro, you're resourceful. You got more Chromebooks in 3 days than I got in the last year. Can you help me wrangle Google, Apple, and Microsoft to do more of this kind of thing and come on board at Future Schools? And that's literally how I got going. I said, well, I'm a graduate student. I could do 10 hours a week. Next thing you know, I'm executive vice president of a company. So I went from 10 hours to what I'm doing now. And we've been working with the big three on a lot of projects, but guys, what you guys are going through, man, with these companies, it's crazy. I mean, I'm working with them at a top level, and it's just interesting to see the dynamics of these ed tech companies and how they work with school districts and teachers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I bet.
We were hoping you could tell us a little bit more about what's going on at Future of Schools right now. What does your work look like, and how are you gearing up for 2021?
So coming off of COVID, when we were, going back and everything was looking good, and we were all thinking school was going to be normal, I had come up with this idea, and we should have interviewed you guys, and maybe we'll do this, called One Big Idea. Because we had got contacted by the U.S. Department of Education to start working with the faith-based office. And what I wanted to do was get folk like yourself who had gone through COVID and ask you, what is your one big idea that could change education now that you've had that experience? So what happened was, a lot of thought leaders from across the country have been on that podcast. And it's been very well received. I mean, we've had a lot of high-level leaders be on this. So that was one idea. The other idea I told colleagues, I said, we've got to capture, right? We went through COVID, but who's documenting what we learned, right? And nobody, we didn't feel anybody out there was documenting anything. Now, the we work a lot with the the Superintendents Association, Dan Dominique, and all the 13,000 superintendents in the country. So they've been documenting best practices from a district level. But what we wanted to do was document what teachers learned, what school leaders learned, and then what districts learned. So we created this program called the Resilient District Prize, where we took some of the money that we were funding Innovative Educators Award and said, we're going to give 4 teachers who have done innovation, and anybody in the country can apply $10,000 for whatever they want to do around, continue kind of their innovation. We're going to give 4 schools and 4 districts. So we had about 70 districts. I mean, I'm talking urban, big urban districts, rural, small schools like the one you're going to work at, Mike. We had the CAPS network apply, and they're judging those now. And so what we're going to do is we're going to give those awards, and then the Successful Practice Network is going to put together a book that'll come out in September. So that's what we wanted to do and what we're going to continue to do. But now the Delta variant is here, and guys, we're literally going to have to go back to kind of what we were doing in the first wave, which was one of the things we did early was what we call the teacher triage, where we just gave teachers money every week. Like, okay, like you guys, okay, just tell us, I need $50 for a pizza party on Friday because my kids are tired of wearing these masks, and you could apply, and so I think where we're going back to be honest, is what we call crisis schooling mode, where we're going to just do, try to mitigate crisis schooling and really try to help with online and blended education. There's a lot of signs in the wind right now. There's more districts I'm reading about every day that saying they're going virtual again. And if we get back to a fully virtual environment or even a quarter of a virtual environment, let's try to support that transition. So that's what we're working on now. So be looking for that Resilient District Prize, just because I think it's going to be cool. The one thing I will tell you guys, though, is we thought there were going to be a lot of in-depth innovation out there, and we really are not seeing it. And that when I got back to the office last Thursday, that was a disappointment for me because I just knew people were out there innovating. Well, not so much, to be honest.
Can you just give us a few insights into what have we learned? What kinds of things are you coming back with?
Well, so I'm going to do teachers, I'm going to do students, teachers, parents, districts. So students, we learned a lot about social emotional learning. And what we learned is that kids are devastated by COVID, right? What we learned is like in Clark County, Las Vegas, they had 18 suicides in their secondary schools. And most of it was because of the socialization of young people. We learned a lot of learning loss in big districts like New York. We learned a lot about how efficacy is a huge issue. Little Johnny does not want to stay on that computer. We learned, of course, districts across the country had to minimize their standards because nobody was going to pass those tests, right? What we learned about parents, like I said, we've done what we call parent tech trainings in rural districts where parents had no clue on how to use Microsoft Surface or Google platforms. So we actually got Google and Microsoft to give those trainings away for free. And what we learned is that, you can't really help little Johnny if you don't know how to use it, right? And a lot of these parents were accessing their relationship with their kids on their phones because Apple platform can be on a phone. So we learned that at a school level, we learned that schools need resources. Even though there's a lot of money out there, there's still some real equity issues, especially in urban districts. And we had a school in Charleston that's one of our star schools where this got on the Today Show. The principal's working at Walmart in the evenings to just get money for his kids during COVID. Or one of the teachers that we gave, Chef El Jamal in Chicago, he would go into one of the worst neighborhoods in Chicago with his Verizon Wi-Fi, so every day for 8 hours so that his kids could have Wi-Fi to do their homework. We gave that guy some money. So we learned there was a lot of equity issues. And at the district level, I mean, where you talk about Miami-Dade, when not Miami-Dade, but I think it was either Miami-Dade or Broward County. They had a little 16-year-old guy hack their whole online system. And so we learned the districts weren't really prepared from a cybersecurity standpoint in regards to how they were going to run, um, things. So we learned a lot. I mean, there's a lot out there. And I don't know that we learned from anything, but we did learn a lot. Does that make sense?
That equity piece is huge. Yeah, I think just learning that the pandemic in itself has created more awareness around this idea of equity. I think in realizing that not the kids just don't have access to stuff is huge.
Yeah, there's so much to chew on there, what you just talked about, Antonio. I think one of the things I'm wondering is, you guys are operating, Future of Schools operating at like you were saying, with sort of top level organizations, Microsoft, Google, Apple, whomever else, right? And that's super important work. I've talked a number of times on this podcast how I think education needs to have kind of two avenues in which it's pursuing change. Top level work with the organizations that you're talking about at the policy level, et cetera, but then at the same time, grassroots level work at the classroom level. I'm wondering how you kind of move between the super top level work while also maintaining a focus on like how those policies, how the actual like computers are getting to students at the classroom level, right? How do you go between the top and the bottom while maintaining focus and kind of maintaining I guess communication and like integration with folks that are acting at the classroom level?
Right. So that's a great question, Mike, and I just got a call on that today. So, so, so what we've done is the reason why we've pursued the big three at the highest level, like working with the chief executive officer of Google Education. I won't mention her name just because she may not want me to mention it, but just talking to her today. So we go to her and say, hey, at the end of the day, we're an intermediary between you and 200 districts. And I know you want to sell computers, right? But what we want to do is we want to make sure that on the ground, we can connect you, your big entity, with solutions that can help Mike Dunn if he has a problem. Okay, and nobody's too small, right? And so, for instance, there's in Charleston County, South Carolina, the Charleston County School District, when COVID hit, 70% of the kids in Charleston proper went to school all last year. Only 10% of the kids, or 20%, in North Charleston went to school because 5,000 people in the community got COVID. So the North Charleston folk, we had to create community learning pods where they would go to school in the community. But we had to get Google to say, hey, we got to get some computers for these churches and nonprofits and other groups who want to do these pods. So little Johnny didn't have to go in a school building because he might get COVID and bring it back to his grandmother and she would die. He can go to the local church. And that's kind of the solutions that we work on. And then, so for instance, so now, because they had the experience last year, Charleston County and a consortium of schools in that area have 473 families that are of color who said, we're not sending our kids back regardless. So they created a virtual academy. So I got a call like 2 weeks ago where they could navigate Google just to get somebody to train their teachers on Chromebook, right? So they called me and said, can you call the top people at Google and get this done for us? Because our local guy won't call us back. Well, I called that guy's boss. Hey, and I got a call today. She said in 24 hours it was fixed.
Wow, that's awesome.
So that's kind of the stuff that we're working on every day, right? Those types of solutions.
Sure.
So can you tell me a little more about how educators can apply for grants through Future of Schools?
Yeah, it's just right on our website. And you click on the teacher, you click right here, it says support educators, and then you click and you can apply. And this year, we used those funds for that resilient school project. So that already passed. I think the deadline to get that grant in was, I think, end of July or August 1st. And they've already even had the judging. But Since we didn't get a good cohort of folk who did any innovation, the team who's heading that up said that they're going to do a redo in November, maybe because they're thinking that maybe because we put it out in May, folks who just had their head buried in the sand trying to close out this year, and a lot of the Janine Dunns of the world didn't apply, or the Mikes. And so if we put it out again in October, maybe you guys will apply, because we wanted the innovators. And unfortunately, yeah, we, we got
Oh, we
people
will
who,
apply.
yeah, we
I can
got
tell
people
you,
who say,
we were resilient.
one of the ladies that is getting an award, and we love teachers. You guys are so awesome because you guys don't ask for like crazy stuff. You ask for just like one simple thing that you need as a solution. If you just had the money for this, and so it just breaks our heart to see that teachers don't have the money for those little things that could make such a difference in kids' lives. So please apply.
Yes, yes. You should come visit our school, Antonio.
Hey, I would love to, I would. But actually, Dr. Melanie Hicks is heading up our networks, and so she's really she loves to travel. So I'll definitely send me your email, and I'll let Melanie know about you. She loves to go to schools.
So Antonio, I always know you as having all sorts of like little random side hustles you got going on. I was just cruising through your LinkedIn profile, and you got a little dabble in this, little dabble in that. And I'm just curious what kinds of side hustle projects you got going on these days. Anything cool in the works? Anything happening either with Future of School or without Future of School?
No. Well, yeah. So I am working now. I'm kind of narrowing my focus on this equity and access stuff, right? Because of just my dissertation. So I've been asked to do. We have 1,400. Well, let me say this to you guys. South Carolina is ranked 44th in the nation in education, but we're ranked number 10 in after school in the country. So there's a huge disparity between our system and what we're doing outside of the school day. And since my research was on after school, our After School Alliance is trying to see what are the equity issues there. So we're going to do a study on kind of why is there systematic racism in the system but not in after school, right? And so I think that's a pretty cool project. I was sharing that with one of our professors, the policy guy at Northeastern, Buell, and he was like, "Dude, that is crazy," because that's what you wrote about when we did our policy class. So we're trying to figure out some stuff. We had a law passed in 1970 in South Carolina that said we could offer students a minimally adequate education, and that's okay. And so in South Carolina, that was a big issue where we even had documentaries done on that, where there was this huge disparity between our suburban districts and our inner city and rural districts, where the buildings are old and books from 1932. Crazy stuff. And so I'm very interested in seeing how we can maybe fix that from a systems level. That's my latest side hustle, Mike.
Cool. That's super cool. That sounds super interesting. And they talk pretty often when you're in a doctoral program, right? As you're kind of winding down your program, like scope, and you're finishing your dissertation, there is often talk like, what do you do next? And how can you capitalize directly on your research as a, springboard into the next thing that is happening on your list? And like how you want to make that change using your research. I think it's really easy if you're a scholar practitioner to kind of do your research, get that thing done, and never touch it again, right? Because you get embroiled in the day-to-day activity of your like existence as a teacher or as a principal or what have you, and I think it's super important that more scholar practitioners take that step of engaging with their research, fairly quickly after they complete it. I think that it sounds like you're kind of on that track.
Yeah. Well, I jumped in also. I was asked to join a group of leaders to do the same kind of work in equity with healthcare providers, because in South Carolina, we were also having an issue with COVID and the disparity between the healthcare. And I have some background in healthcare because of my work at Hope Worldwide. So I got the taste of it with that group. And then once this opportunity, well, they reached out to me and said, hey, you did this in your research. Can you come help us? And so I jumped on that opportunity because I really think it's important. I mean, we have some serious issues in this area in South Carolina. So we're trying to work on this stuff.
Antonio, we knew this about you from the discussion boards, that you always have a hand in something.
That's right.
The good old discussion boards. So Antonio, you have been a recent columnist on Getting Smart, and Tom Vander Ark and Emily Liebtag have actually been guests on the pod here. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you've been thinking about on Getting Smart?
Yeah, so I started writing about schools, right? So Dr. Unger and my dissertation, Dr. Childress McGee always pushed me, you got to write, dude. You got to write. The stuff that you're working on needs to be written. So I wrote about Olympic High School, and then I wrote about Academic Magnet. I don't know if you've ever heard of that school. It's the #1 school in the nation down in North Charleston. And those got picked up, right? And then just did a couple other articles. I think it was like 2 others. And then one of their team reached out to me while I was actually down at the Mayo Clinic and said, hey, we really liked what you're doing. Would you be willing to be a monthly columnist with us? And I just was floored. I told my wife, what? This is crazy. Like, really? And so I said, okay, yeah, because I want to write books and do stuff like this. And so I'm doing this piece, No Parent Left Behind. This month, it comes out tomorrow. And then I'm also, because I do college and career pathways research, there's a project called Career Navigator where I'll be talking about, there's a recent article in the New York Times saying that 70% of the African-American students who got a college degree are now in more debt than they were before they went to college. And this is kind of a crust of my career pathways work. So I want to write about that. How do we make that process more equitable if we're going to continue to tell these young people that, college is the way to get through life, but yet still they're strapped with debt and they're not really making it in our society. So that'll be what's coming out in September. So I'm just going to continue trying to write on these equity issues, and try to put something out there to get people thinking about this stuff,
Antonio, we should connect outside the pod to talk more about that, because I got lots of thoughts to share with you.
Yeah, like I said, I want you guys, I'm going to email Amy tomorrow and say, hey, you need to talk to this Rethinking Edu team. They got some big ideas.
Yeah, man, we try.
And she loves teachers, so she'll jump on that.
Hey everyone, this is Mike. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode with Antonio Boyd in our conversation about his work at Future of School. Check out the website futureof.school to read more about Antonio's work and to get in on those teacher grants. Those are a big deal. We'll drop a link to that website in the show notes, but head on over there right quick to get a handle on what Antonio's got going on. We would also love if you headed over to our Patreon page. That's patreon.com/rethinkingedu, where you can support us at the $1 or $3 a month level. At the $3 a month level, you get exclusive access to our behind-the-scenes conversation with our guests. For example, Antonio Boyd. We're calling that exclusive content the Think Tank, where you can get just more of that rethinking EDU that you love in your life. So head on over to patreon.com/rethinkingedu, support us, and also be sure to check out our very own Matt Downing's podcast called Diving Deep EDU. Thanks.
A quick interruption to let you know about another great podcast.
Curious conversations with all types of peeps. Encouraging innovation, we are diving deep. Certainly education is what we like to speak. Fervent with dedication, now it is time to teach.
Diving Deep EDU. Thought-provoking conversations.
So friends, we're getting late into the podcast, and I want to transition a little bit into our reflection segment, where we always ask ourselves and our guests to reflect on our conversation, share a couple things that this conversation is sort of making us rethink about education. Of course, I always have lots of thoughts, but I sometimes feel like I go first too often. So Janine, why don't you go first? What is this conversation making you rethink about education?
It's funny. I always think that too. I have lots of thoughts. And careful of my airtime.
Yeah, right.
All right. Well, I'm gonna take on. I really appreciate the comments about just the inclusion of parents. Leave no parent behind. I can't wait for you to come out with that article. But reminder that, you know, if you want to bring parents along, you have to educate them as well too. That here we are distributing all of this kind of technology, and yet we're expecting parents to be involved in their child's, you know, education. But if they don't know how to access what the kids are doing online, then those expectations should really be thrown out the window, because that's totally not fair. So I definitely, I have this written down here, like to have like a parent tech night at school so that we can definitely make sure that they know how to access things. So I appreciate that, Antonio.
Julie, what are you thinking?
I'm thinking about how your conversation is challenging us to think about the school as embedded in the community. How wonderful it would be to really think about what have we learned through COVID. And since we're bracing for, you know, whatever comes next, I think we are more resilient, as you said. Then this isn't sneaking up on us this time. So I'm looking forward to mastering, becoming, you know, fluid, you know, in and out of the classroom, and definitely doing it better. And then also just thinking about the school as a community, the community hub, the learning center for families and students and teachers, and how we value school and how does the school value families. So these are some of the things that Antonio challenged me to think about tonight.
Yeah, Julie, I think you're stealing a lot of what my thoughts are too. You know, we've talked to a number of guests on this podcast around what role does school play in helping parents really help their kids. And I think a lot about this when it comes to the homework wars, right? Which, if you're ever on Twitter and you get into one of these, you know, hashtags that is following a chain where people are, you know, tweeting back and forth about the value or lack of value of homework, this is really what it comes down to for me. And, you know, I spent the last 11 years working at a school for kids with language-based learning disabilities. And so many of those kids' challenges were around accessing text, you know, at a level that was high, and challenging text. And doing that on their own was probably the hardest thing that they could do. And when their parents tried to engage them in you know, homework at home, parents were like, I don't know how to help my kid. And part of the reason was because they weren't trained professionals, right? We're talking about people who work at hospitals as nurses or as doctors, people who work in law offices, people who work as landscapers, people who work as plumbers. All their kids going to this school, and they're trying to help their dyslexic student figure out how to access text when it's a literal neurological challenge that they're having. And we're asking them to do that at home with very little support. So I think it begs the question that if we're going to continue to ask students to grapple with text, if we're going to continue to ask students to grapple with high-level numeracy skills, that we need to be spending time helping parents help their students more effectively, or providing additional resources to where students can you know, access that extra help potentially with their parents' guidance, so the parent doesn't happen to have to act as the expert in those fields. You know, if we're talking about like a family who owns a landscaping business, and the kid is taking Calc 2 in high school, potentially members of that family never had to, you know, take math at that level. So how are we going to ask them to do, you know, unsupervised homework assignments at home without offering support for those parents? So I think that's sort of what this conversation is making me think of. And Antonio, you said it right on, right? That it's ultimately an equity issue when we're talking about education. It is the ultimate equity issue, you know. So thank you for that. And Antonio, what is this conversation making you reflect on?
Well, you know, I'm honored to be with three educators, right? So I really do get jazzed when I'm around you guys, right? I just do. And it's kind of the same way I felt about the volunteers when I worked at Hope Worldwide. I mean, anybody willing to give up their time to go into a disaster, you got to really feel good about it. And to be honest with you, that's what you guys do pretty much. You don't get paid a lot and you volunteer to go into a disaster, right? And so, I'm honored to be with you. And I think the thing that I've been really grappling with, like the last couple of days, this has been burning me in my soul, is this idea that we thought at the leadership level in education, at the macro level, that we could just turn this spigot off for a year, 70 months or whatever this COVID has been, and then turn it back on and it was going to be okay, right? And that was our solution. And we never thought about, what if a Delta comes again? We never thought about, what if we have these rogue governors who say, you got to wear a mask, you can't wear a mask, politicizing this thing. What if we thought about, critical race theory and how it's going to be used to attack a system, where we're going to do cameras in your schools. We never thought about any of those things. And what I'm really feeling is, and then nobody's talking to that frontline worker, right? Just like when COVID happened, we got this deep appreciation for all of our restaurant workers, our healthcare workers, and all this. But even in this next wave of Delta, we still are playing games with teachers. We're still debating, messing around here with the front line of our system. And I'm like, when are we going to get to a point where we respect the front line and we empower the front line and we understand, we ask the front line, what do you need versus we're going to mandate what you do. And so I'm trying to figure out who in the heck is in charge of that, and how either do we fire them or do we make them do the right thing? Is that Cardozo? Who is that person? Because this is a mess, right? That's what I
So that's like a whole other conversation, much longer podcast. But as we get into this last segment, we always like to share with our listeners some plugs. And co-hosts, I see maybe that you all have brought some plugs. Janine, what do you want to plug?
Well, I've actually been doing a lot of coursework this summer on equity, inclusion, belonging. And one of the books that I am currently reading through, is called 5 Practices for Equity-Focused School Leadership. And it's got some good tips in there. And if there any schools out there are thinking of doing an equity audit of some sort, this would be a great book for you to investigate.
Cool. Okay, we'll drop that link in the show notes. Julie, do you got a plug?
My fellow action researchers from Northeastern, I'm reading Street Data, a next generation model for equity, pedagogy, and school transformation. Talks about highlighting narrative and lived experiences as part of gauging school success. It's one of the things they talk about that's been interesting to me and has me thinking as an action researcher of late.
That's awesome. Yeah, I have never had any shortage of books because of this podcast. I'll tell you that. Antonio, what do you want to plug this evening?
Okay, so I want to plug the Resilient District Prize coming up. I want you to pay attention to who wins and what they win for. Also, what we learn. Make sure we get that document from the Successful Practice Network. I'll make sure you guys have it so you can distribute it to your folk. Also, of course, on the 18th, Leave No Parent Behind is coming out on Getting Smart. And then I'm writing a book that I want to start plugging because I love, this project. It's called the Booker T Blueprint, African American Experiential Education in the Jim Crow South. And what this book is about is, when we talk about, and you guys know all this because you're Unger people, we talk about the fathers of experiential learning. Of course, we talk about Dewey and all these folks, Cobb, but we don't talk about Booker T. Washington, who actually not only started the Tuskegee Institute, which was an experiential learning historically Black college, but he also started the Rosenwald schools, which are 5,000 elementary and secondary schools in the Jim Crow South when Black and brown folks weren't able to go to regular schools, and also Black teachers had nowhere to be trained. And so my book is about what happened, right? Everything from, what was the education experiences of these folks post-slavery to how they built this system of schools to how even today a lot of the experiential learning that goes on in historically Black colleges that are still going on today that nobody ever talks about. And so what I'm trying to do here is paint if you're going to have a Mount Rushmore of experiential learning, you got to put Booker T. Washington on that mountain. And it's one of these things that has happened in our society where a lot of these stories are buried in systematic racism. And so I'm trying to highlight him in a different way. So be looking for that. I'm trying to finish it by the first part of next year, and we'll get that out. Sounds good?
That's awesome. Yeah, we'll drop a little note about that in our show notes. And as you move forward with that project, let us know, and we'll include a link to it in our future episodes. Dr. Antonio Boyd, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here on our podcast. We couldn't appreciate you any more. Listeners, thank you so much for dropping in on this conversation with Antonio. Check us out on any platform you get your podcast, but we would love it if you shared our podcast with a friend, potentially an educator that you know that you think would appreciate this conversation. You can also shout us out on LinkedIn, which would be super helpful, or Twitter using the hashtag RethinkingEDU. And if you're really dedicated and you absolutely love this show, head on over to our Patreon page. That's patreon.com/rethinkingedu, where you can donate now at the $3 a month level and get our exclusive content called The Think Tank, where you can hear some behind the scenes conversations with our guests. Antonio, Janine, and Julie, it's always a pleasure. Guests, thank you so much, and keep rethinking EDU.